right. So an application is made either by a person who recognizes that this is a child in need of care and protection, and so they make that application to the Children's Court and ask that they are given parental rights and responsibility over this child. Sometimes it's for a season or for a specific reason. For example, maybe to help this child obtain medical care or to obtain a certain level of education. But that's very disruptive.
What?
The 2 minutes.
You can hear?
Yeah.
How can you hear?
I don't know.
Buni, how can my guest hear the guest can hear you say 2 minutes? Is it because it's coming from there to here, or it's because my talkback is too loud? No, I think I'm hearing from here. I think it's too loud. You can hear 2 minutes.
I wasn't even sure it's coming from.
It's okay. Iko sawa. Ongea na sauti. Yeah. Okay. Iko sawa. Yeah, okay. So now, when it comes to adoption, you will explain the different type of adoptions that we have in the country. I know you've mentioned that currently we're having, local is now the domestic adoption, is it?
Yes, that's the domestic adoption.
So why we are still under that, and not the, why foreigners cannot?
Not yet adopted.
Yeah.
Yes, we are yet to come up with a guiding principle or laws that will govern those adoption, because the government and the stakeholders want to ensure that if a child is adopted and taken out of the country, that they can keep tabs to ensure this child is well maintained. Yeah.
Can you hear what they're saying? No? Yes?
From there, not from here.
Okay, yeah. They'll not be that loud when you start. So, John, we said we're having how many questions? 5. 5? Last time we said 8, and then when I went back, it's like there are no questions. But they had said 5. So this time it's 5. Okay. Human beings are social creatures, and their one-way form of connection is through relationships. But for children, their first form of relationship is through parenting. But due to unfortunate situations, some children do not have the parent setup, and therefore we have certain legal mechanisms that ensure that children have a family setup to foster their growth. And that's why here on Law Matters, a show that is educative, informative, and offers legal aid solution to what we face in our day-to-day lives, is focusing on the issue of guardianship, adoption, and foster care placement. Remember, you can send in your questions and feedback on this particular show on our social media platforms at KUTV Kenya on Facebook, at KUTV Kenya on YouTube, and KUTV_Kenya on Twitter. My name is Ivan Mwangi, but before we get into the nitty-gritties of this particular discussion, let me allow my guest to introduce herself. Kindly.
Good evening. My name is Nelima Walubengo Tindi, an advocate of 6 years in practice, whose main focus is family matters. So that includes children in need of care and protection. My God,
sorry.
Children in need of care and protection, estate planning matters, succession, and any other family matter.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, when we look into the issue of guardianship, foster placement, and adoption, they are quite complex terms depending on how you love to say it. Okay. So how are these three legal setup structured, and what are their definition, and how are they linked?
Okay. So the baseline of the three is to ensure that a child who is in need of care and protection, a vulnerable child, or a child who has been abandoned, has a place that they can call home. Adoption gives permanency in terms of parental rights and responsibilities. Guardianship gives permanency up to 18 years, and that can be extended beyond in exceptional circumstances, while foster care placement is while the government is trying to place this child, to reintegrate this child back into their family.
Right.
So it's a bit more temporary than guardianship, because the maximum period for foster care placement is 3 years,
Okay.
unless the court extends it for various reasons.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, boiling down on guardianship so that we can get to understand what it all involves.
Okay.
Perhaps, what are some of the qualifications or criteria for one to be a guardian? What are some of the legal steps that one can take to be a guardian of a child?
Okay. So a person who sees this child is in need of care and protection, and they know they can step into the guardianship role, preferably a relative of the child. And the Children Act 2022 now provides that such a person has to be a Kenyan citizen. They have to be 25 years of age and not older than 65 years of age. If it is a sole male, they would have to take guardianship of a male child. If it is a sole female, they would take guardianship of a female child.
Are there financial qualifications or criteria that they will look into before quantifying one to be a guardian of a child?
I won't say it's a qualification necessarily. Having the finances is important, but there's other needs of the child, because maybe the child is well taken care of in terms of their financial needs, but they need a home to stay in.
Okay.
So you're stepping in as guardian in that capacity. And sometimes such guardianship is testamentary in terms of you're looking over just the estate of the child. So in that way, you're not taking custody of the child, you're not bringing that child into your home.
Okay.
So the court will indeed want to confirm that you are able to provide for the needs of the child. How much is needed doesn't necessarily arise, because various home, various abilities, and the court takes cognizant of that fact.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, when you look into guardianship, it's sort of a new way of parenting here in Kenya, because mostly children could be inherited by either the uncles, the aunt, or any other family relative, the grandmother or the grandpa. But now, looking into the situation right now, are we having more Kenyans look into the option of guardianship in terms of a parent writing a will to say, in case of my demise, my brother so-and-so or my sister so-and-so can take up the parenting of my child? Is it something that now we are being, work as a country?
Yes. Well, not necessarily new. I think we are coming into recognition of the importance of inputting that in our estate planning, so that when I go, or my child will be well taken care of, because then I can appoint someone I trust that they'll be able to step in and take care of the child. Of course, taking into consideration that the other parent could be alive. So if the other parent is alive, then the parent will take care of the child together with the guardian that I have appointed. And where there's issues, then they can approach a court of law, so that the court makes determination on now who is making decisions for the child.
Do you have scenarios, you've delved into my next question. Do you have scenarios whereby maybe an uncle and a biological mom are taking care of the child, but when it comes to decision making, they differ due to different parenting styles? Now, who has the veto in terms of making the final decision? Is it the one that has a blood relation, or is it the one who has been enjoined into the parenting through the guardianship sort of legal setup? By
law, they seem to have the similar standing, only that decision-making for the parent will continue even beyond the child's 18th birthday.
Okay.
Now, the guardianship role ceases at the age of 18. But where an uncle per se has been appointed as the guardian and they're having issue with the remaining parent, then they will present it to the court. And whoever is presenting the best interest of the child, however those interests look like, because they vary and they're wide. They could be mental, they could be psychological, they could be financial, then the court will make a decision. Yes.
Do you have scenarios whereby a child can decide to deny, not really deny, denounce a guardian to the extent that maybe they don't have a good relationship, and maybe he or she has the biological parents, so they don't see the need of having a guardian because they see it to be sort of imposing onto their lives? Do you have a scenario whereby a child can deny a guardian?
Yes, it can happen. So long as the child is of age and they can present their views to the court of law, then the court will consider whatever they are saying. And if there is merit, then the court will remove that guardian from their life. And sometimes it's the parent that causes an issue. So in such a case also, unfortunately, the court will also have to just remove the parent, not necessarily permanently, but maybe limit access in the child's best interest, so that then the guardian takes precedence.
Okay.
Yeah.
In scenarios whereby, unfortunately, both parents have died, and therefore a guardian has been put in place to take care of the child. We have children whereby they have, the parents have left behind estates, say properties, but the guardian in this place, given that he's the custodian of the child, decides to misuse or embezzle the funds that have been left behind by the parents. What are some of the legal ramifications that takes precedence in such scenarios?
It is considered a criminal offense, and they are, if found guilty, they are liable to 2 years imprisonment or a 2 million fine, or both.
All right.
Yeah.
So moving away from the issue of guardianship, given that you've said it goes up to 18 years, it can be longer than 18 years depending on the unique scenarios that the court might cite.
Yeah.
In terms of foster care placement, it's something new. It's something that most people used to see in the movies, like maybe the United States, in Canada. It was something that was quite adopted, but here in Kenya not so much. But we are seeing the government sort of, rally Kenyans to take up children in cases whereby they can.
Yeah.
So what are the terms of contract in terms of foster care placement?
Okay. Foster care placement happens, as I said, it's very temporary, and then it is managed by the Sub-County Children Office. Now that's the Office of the Director of Children's Services. So a parent or a person who intends to foster a child approaches the Sub-County Children Office, or approaches a charitable organization in which has children and they would want to foster. And then in conjunction with the Sub-County Children Office, this child, they come up with an agreement after the officers have already done their due diligence and confirmed that this is a fit person to be placed with a child. Remember, they have to confirm that if this child is placed with you, you're in a position to take care of them, as again, not financially necessarily, but you can provide the other needs that they could be having. And then you're given this child to foster or take care of for 1 year. Now that period can be extended up to 3 years. If there is a further extension, the court has to give an order allowing such an extension, because the purpose of fostership is to ensure this child is in a home before they are reunited with their family, not necessarily their biological parent if they cannot be found. Can the government trace their relatives, and can this child be placed in their family?
Okay.
Yeah.
Perhaps, what are some of the laws and policies that have been put in place in terms of foster care? I know you've mentioned that, of course, the Children Office will come to your household and see, okay, can you be able to provide the needs of the child, which are important in terms of parenting? But are they unique laws and policies that might hinder somebody from being a foster parent?
So we call them Schedule 3 offenses. So you cannot be placed with a child if, for example, you have been involved in robbery, you have been involved in drug trafficking, trafficking of firearms, if you've been involved in indecent assault, such things, then you wouldn't be placed with a child.
Okay.
Yes.
So what are some of the unique scenarios that the court will look into? I know you have said foster care runs until 3 years, but in some scenarios, maybe a child has bonded with the new family. What are some of the unique scenarios that the court will look into and say maybe this might move from foster care to the next step, which might be adoption to make it more permanent, or say guardianship?
So ideally, because the court is not yet involved in the foster process, it will have to be the sub-county children office to make this foster parent aware. Now we have to place this child for adoption, or we intended to place this child for adoption, but for one reason or the other have been unable to complete that process yet. Let's extend the fostership.
Okay.
But now if an adoption home has opened up, this child has been declared free for adoption, and there's somebody who's been placed with them, then they will transition that child from the foster home to the prospective adoptive parents.
Okay.
Of course, then there'll be need for bonding, and I would presume that the foster parents would play a key role to ensure that that transition is smooth and that this child is comfortable in the adoptive home. And sometimes the foster parent could be the one who intends to adopt that child.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we have cases, or how can a child now have a voice, okay, to say that they're not comfortable within the foster care placement? I know it runs from 1 year to 3 years, but maybe a child can feel 3 months in, or even a month in, I'm not comfortable. Are there avenues that the child can voice out, especially for young children who perhaps the freedom of, speech is not quite viable for them at that young age?
Okay. In that unfortunate situation, the Department of Children's Service has to step in. When you're placed with a foster child, they would need you to go back to their offices with the child, where they assess the relationship with the child, where they assess the nature of the child, where they assess the demeanor of the child. And if this is a child who can now speak up, they are trained to speak with these children in a way that they could open up to them. And sometimes you'll find a good Samaritan has noted one thing is wrong or the other, and then they would approach maybe necessarily the court, because they don't even know they could go to the children's office first. And then they would approach the court and say, maybe this is a child in need of care and protection. And then that would spiral whatever process needs to happen to remove this child from that foster placement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, in foster care placement, given that it's a I'll call it a short-term contract, is to mean that maybe these children are lost, or for some reason they've been detached from their parents. Maybe, say the parent has been arrested for, say a 3-year prison sentence. What happens when the parents come into the scenario and the child feels like they bond more with the foster care parents vis-a-vis their parents? How now does that unfold?
Okay. The goal is permanence in this child's life. And yes, there's been a gap with their biological parent. Now it is for the foster care parent, biological parent, sub-county children office, and any other stakeholder that is involved to work during that transition period to reintegrate this child back into their family. And for their own comfort, sometimes the foster parent could be there, to just try and ease things or to make the child comfortable. But by and by, then the custody of the child reverts back to their parent. Because eventually, given time, they will become comfortable.
All right.
Yeah.
Even in scenarios where maybe the parents in this case are not to the best interest of the child, how does, who becomes the mediator in such a scenario? Because the child feels inclined to foster care.
So then we would need to establish the issue, and in that scenario, then I'm presuming that the court has come into play. Then the court has the authority to issue something called a family assistance order.
Okay.
The court can ask that these people go to counseling or therapy to deal with whichever issues that are affecting the relationship that they are having, so that they foster the relationship between child and parent, because after all, it could be in their best interest.
Right.
Yeah, because foster care is temporary.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you, Advocate Nelima. We'll have to take our first break, but once we return, we'll be coming back with much, much more, including the issue of adoption, which has been termed as a complexity. We'll be debunking the complexities in adoption here in the country. You stay with us. Okay. All right. So now, that now has been part one.
Part one.
This part two is, we'll be touching on now the adoption.
All right.
I don't know if there's any...
My baby has woken up that she's like, okay, that's
What's
lovely.
going on? I think because she
Yeah.
can see you.
Yeah.
She's comfortable. But
Yeah, she's
once,
very comfortable.
but once,
Nikijaribu kutoka hapo ndio itakuwa
sa
shida.
shida. Yeah. So I think we're done with.
I think you asked the questions really well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think we're done with guardianship and foster.
Okay. Now we're going into adoption.
So we're going to adoption.
As that Mududu was sent to
Yeah,
destroy.
I know.
I was about to scream.
I saw it, but I thought it just flew.
I was like, okay, please.
You felt it in your head, like it's here. I saw it and I was like, okay, where has it gone? Then I'm seeing it on the table. I'm like, okay, calm down.
I know.
Let's
Just like,
continue.
okay.
So adoption.
Thank you. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So, okay. People relate more with scenarios. She was actually giving them very well. So I was like, okay, let me just jump with her. But especially in adoption, so many scenarios can unfold, so I can jump in with them. Yeah. So, thank you.
Okay.
Seconds.
20 seconds to go. Thank you for staying with us. You're watching Law Matters. Tonight we're looking into the issue of adoption, guardianship and foster care placement. In the first segment of our show, we looked into guardianship and foster care placement, but now let's debunk the issue of adoption. Now, Advocate Nelima, what are some of the legal frameworks when it comes to adoption, and how has it been over the years with the Children Act 2022 and before the promulgation of the 2010 Constitution?
We had the Children Act 2001, which was the guiding law for matters adoption. The Children Act 2022 enhances the provisions in terms of adoption because we are looking at kinship adoption, which has now been defined. We have domestic or local adoption, and then we look at international adoption.
Okay. So here in the country, so far, what are the different sort of groups in terms of adoption?
Okay, Currently, we have ongoing kinship adoption and local adoption. There's still a moratorium that was issued by the government in 2014 on international adoptions. So that moratorium is in place, save for exceptional circumstances. For example, where a Kenyan is married to a foreign citizen. Now, such a couple can adopt. Yes.
When you talk about, before we get into the local adoption and the issue of step-parent sort of adoption, in case one of the parent is a foreign citizen, when it comes to kinship adoption, how does it unfold? Because I would imagine kinship is about maybe that was my sister's child, so I get to adopt him or her. How is it for kinship adoption, or does it border guardianship sort of?
Most of the times it will start as guardianship. It will grow into adoption because of looking for permanency. Now, kinship adoption, as you've rightly stated, is by a relative of the child. Kinship adoption, a difference with it, kinship adoption has with other local adoption is that there's already that presumed period of living with a child. So once that child has been declared free for adoption by a registered adoption society, you can head directly to court seeking the adoption orders. Unlike a local adoption, once a child is declared free for adoption, they have to be placed with a prospective adoptive parent for a period of 3 consecutive months to ensure that they are bonding and they would live well together before then they file in court. Yes.
Now, is it, I've seen scenarios or situations whereby maybe a couple that wants to adopt will move to, say, an adoption home. What is the process in terms of choosing a child they want to adopt? Because I would imagine that maybe somebody would prefer a child with a certain skin tone, or from if they have background details, I want to know, okay, they came from which part of the country, which community. Does a parent who wants to adopt get to choose in terms of what specificity they want from the child?
Okay. So any adoption process starts with a registered adoption agency. So for example, if I want to adopt a child, I will approach a registered adoption agency. We have some like Little Angels Network, we have Kenya Children's Home Adoption Society, we have BACNA, we have KKPI. Approach whichever one I'm comfortable with, make my intention known, and then they will begin their process. They will first need to confirm that I am fit to adopt. They will conduct medical assessment tests. They will want my police clearance certificate. They will want to see my financials. They will want to see the views of my relatives and friends. Do they think I am a fit person to adopt? After that, then I'll give my requirements to them. So I want a child this age, this sex, this and that skin tone, maybe as you've said. And then as they work with other charitable organizations, then they will look at the children who are available, and then they will place me. I am not allowed to pre-select a child. You can only pre-select a child, and I'm putting that in quotes because either if you're adopting your kin, so that's kinship adoption, or if you are a foster parent and you now want to adopt the child who was in your foster care. Yes. Yes. In any other form of adoption, pre-selection is illegal.
All right. Now, when we look into the 3 months that, in a case whereby it's not kinship, it's more local adoption. In the 3 months, what are they looking into, and what are the scenarios that you might find yourself being denied the chance to adopt the child, maybe because in the 3, let me call it a testing time, you've not met the requirements that maybe the adoption or the children officers think are needed?
So as that happens, there are 2 organizations normally that are looking into that relationship. They're monitoring the growth of that relationship because the intention is for it to grow. So that is the home, the charitable institution the child was in, and the adoption society. So they will ask that you visit them for, for assessment. And sometimes they will want to come to your home to see the environment, to see that the child has relaxed in the environment, the child is free before you, and taking cognizance of the fact that some people form relationships slowly. Sometimes that 3 months is not enough. So while the 3 months may lapse and you are required to file for the adoption in court, the assessment can continue just to ensure, to give chance to those who don't form bonds that fast.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
It's quite an interesting scenario.
Yeah.
Now, when, say you move to adopt the child, maybe as a couple,
Okay.
but in between the process of adoption, you decide to divorce.
Okay.
Can that cause an implication into the adoption process?
Okay, so my presumption is if you're adopting as a couple, you are doing it together. Now, if one person then moves away and says, I no longer want to even take part in that process, then they're allowed to. And that speaks of permanency, so that they have to show that separation is permanent.
Okay.
And I'm yet to encounter, though, maybe there's a situation where they have gone separate ways, but the adoption order was almost given and they still want to adopt together. Then the effect of that is that becomes their child, and then there are other mechanisms that can kick in via the Children's Act to ensure that they both are in the child's life and they both take care of the child.
Well, eventually.
Yeah, providing maintenance, ensuring there's access to both parents.
So does it now become a co-parenting of some sort?
It could become a co-parenting, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, when it comes to a situation whereby it's a Kenyan and a foreigner,
Okay.
so they have moved ahead to adopt a child, but for some reason they adopted the child in the country,
Yeah.
but maybe when the child is maybe they adopted the child when he or she was, say, 3 months, but when the child is, say, 8 years, they decide to relocate, move from Kenya to, say, United States, Canada, Zambia, Uganda, what have you.
Okay.
Will that interfere with the adoption process, given that maybe the monitoring was done, is being done in the country?
So ideally, once the adoption process is complete, unless the court stated otherwise, that they would want to, do check-ins with the child, that those parents have acquired rights and responsibility as if that was their biological child.
Okay.
So they have the right to travel with the child, they have the right to relocate that child at whatever age. They have a right to do whatever any other parent would do
With
to
the
their,
child.
yes, with their child.
I know you mentioned that the first 3 months is the testing time in terms
Yeah.
of bonding. So at what particular period of time will now the adoption process be deemed complete,
Okay.
to the extent now permanency kicks in?
All right. So what happens, and let me just go back a bit, because sometimes during the adoption process, a parent or the parents would want to leave the country with the child.
Yeah.
They can approach the court for that leave, and now in this case, the court makes that child a ward of the court,
Okay.
meaning the court will want to know that this child went to this so-and-so country, and they have been returned. So they would expect the adoptive parent to leave a surety with the court, just as an assurance that they will return this child to the country because they are yet to become the parent per se of that child.
Okay.
Okay, now coming to your question,
In terms of now when
the permanency.
yeah.
Okay, so now once an adoption order is given, so that adoption is registered in the Adopted Children Register, and something called an adoption certificate is issued. And now we have law that states that such adoption certificate now is used to produce now the birth certificate. Now the birth certificate will come with the adoptive parent name. Now we no longer call them adoptive parent, but we call them parents, the parent's name, and the name that they've chosen for this child. So the birth certificate I have and the birth certificate this adopted child will have are similar. Yes.
Okay.
So now with that permanency, when I was a child and my parents could move with me,
Okay.
so the same way, these parents can now move with that child.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we have unique cases whereby a couple or a parent adopts a child? Of course, they found the child in the adoption center. But then, years in, the biological parents, in the quest to search for the child, finds the child. What is done in that particular situation whereby the biological parents will resurface and say, my child got lost. I don't even know how they ended up in another home. How does that turn up when the adoption process is already complete?
Okay. These parents would have to show that their child was either lost or kidnapped.
They'll have to give evidence that indeed.
Yes, and that they have been looking for this child. Ideally, we'll find maybe police reports, we'll find the DCI was involved, maybe even it's the DCI that traced this child. And now what to do in such a circumstance? Adoption order has already been given. If adoption order has not yet been given, then that process can be backtracked. But where an adoption order has been given, then we are looking at either revoking the adoption order or reviewing it so that the adoptive parent and the biological parent retain custody, care and control of this child. And maybe for a certain period until, and especially if this child has already been adopted for a period of more than 5 years, they've lived with their now parent more than 5 years. Of course, then the court would want to look at their best interest. They already know this is home. And we're telling them, but you had another home. And for circumstances beyond the parent's control, then you lost that home. So then we can't now punish the biological parent. But then again, there's the adoptive parent here. So then that would be a very delicate balance to ensure that they both can be in that child's life only if they both serve that child's best interest.
Okay. Does it get murky in such situation because of different parenting styles? And while we're saying, of course, it is the best interest of the child, different parenting style will have different ways of, you know, raising the child. So does it ever get murky to the point now it's a confrontation, the child is exposed to trauma because of the push and pull between the two families?
It definitely will. If there's that lack of understanding or that lack of agreement on that principle, and then in that case, then the court would have to step in because then this becomes a vulnerable child. And make a hard decision, hard as that may be. Either the adoptive parent is removed from the picture or the biological parent. Yeah.
Now, are there unique qualifications in terms of ensuring that a parent adopts? Because even in the cases that we have had in the court of law, you'll find a family with, say, 3 children, and now biological children, and now they're willing to adopt one child. Then we have a scenario whereby maybe the couple are not getting children, so they don't want to get children, but it was the biological way, so they think adoption is a viable setup. But now you'll find the court giving the child to this family that has 3 children, vis-a-vis the couple that maybe for one reason or another do not have children. So what is the balancing situation? Because these 2 scenarios that have been cited have made adoption seem like a complex issue to the extent that some parents feel like it's frustrating.
Okay. You know, different families, different needs. But the bottom line with adoption, I want to believe, is that this child now has a home.
Yeah.
So because the court does not, there's no scenario we have one child being adopted by two families.
Yeah.
So then what happens, the court looks at the unique circumstances. Remember, by the time you get to court, you've already gone through adoption society. They've deemed that you're fit to be placed with a child, unless and until something comes up, maybe during the court process. Maybe the guardian ad litem. Guardian ad litem is someone who's appointed by the court during the adoptive process to basically be the eyes of the court during this process. And should they see that this child is exposed in one way or another, then they can make an application for removal of that child from that family, whether that family has biological children or not.
Okay.
So that child is protected in that way. And during the adoption process, the Department of Children's Services is also involved, the Director of Children's Services, because then they have to file a report either recommending that adoption based on the assessment or not recommending.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, there's cases of single parent adoption. In a society whereby nowadays we're having conversation of a father figure or a mother figure, but we're having a single parent, either a dad or a mom, who can provide the needs of the child, but there's a figure here that will not be supplemented. How is it with single parent adoption?
It's allowed. It's allowed. And a single male can adopt a male child unless they already have a female child. Then they'll just be adding.
Okay.
A single female can adopt a female child.
Yeah.
Unless they already have a son, then they could adopt a boy. I'd want to believe, because of the way the adoption process is set up, the court also wants to be satisfied that there is a community around, because they look at things like, has your extended family, what are their views on you adopting? And why those views are important is because then they can form a community around this child. So then that if there's no father figure currently in the family, then they could get that father figure from the community around them and vice versa.
All right.
Yeah.
So what are some of the barriers to child adoption? Why is it so hard for some, parents who say adoption in Kenya is quite hard? It's quite a tasking issue. We need legal mechanism in place to make it a bit easier. As an advocate, why are we having so many barriers in adoption?
I wouldn't call them barriers necessarily. It's just because it's a permanent process.
Okay.
So the court and the other stakeholders, that's the government, they want to ensure that if they're removing, despite the fact that this child is vulnerable, placing them in a permanent home, that home is will be in the child's best interest. So that they have mechanisms, checks and balances to ensure that. But once the adoption society is satisfied that this child is free for adoption, is satisfied that you're a fit parent, and the court concurs with those findings and even makes an independent decision that you are fit to adopt, this child is free for adoption, then that order will be given. Maybe a challenge people have is just understanding the process, and but it can be simplified in a way because of use of those adoption societies. They explain this process to people. If you approach them, lawyers explain this process to people. If you approach them, and you find that some people who choose to do adoption with an advocate, and some decide to do self-representation.
Okay.
Yes.
So when you look into, I was coming to that, when you look into the two scenarios, self-representation and doing it with an advocate, how can you advise a parent that wants to get into this process of adoption in terms of the best route to take? Of course, preparing them on issues that they may find along the way that they can manage to successfully deal with.
All right, and that's the advantage of having an advocate.
Okay.
Because they have that experience, they're aware of this is how we will need to deal at this stage or at stage 3. Now, if you're self-represented, there are still persons, like, for example, at the court registry, who can assist you and tell you once this order is issued, you need to extract it and then serve it upon this agency and da-da-da-da-da, so that then you are also able to conclude that process. But then having someone do it for you, that makes it easier. And especially because we know, should the court have a question, then we'd know how do we address this matter, what do we do to mitigate something or other. Yeah.
All right, that's interesting. We'll have to take our final break of this particular show, but once we return, we'll be having the final segment, which include question and answer session from our audience, which is quite interactive. See you after this break. 20 minutes break, then the last questions. I'm told there are 5 questions, so guys, we're having 5 questions, is it? 5 questions? How many questions do you have? 5? 4 questions? 4, all right. So I'll do first 2, 5, okay. Yeah. I'll do first 3 and then I'll do then 2, okay, so
Oh, actually, they will be asking. Okay, live.
the question live.
Okay.
So you'll be saying.
They're written.
So they'll not ask live. Okay.
They're not asking live.
Okay, so. Okay.
They're not asking live.
They're not asking live. I think it's because of that camera. So I'll say Advocate Neliwa, we have Davis, whoever from me, and they're asking this and this and this.
Okay. These are the borders, eh? They're borders.
Yeah, they stay around. I think they stay around there. So I think they have a hostel.
Just right next.
Yeah.
I think Limona, the light cliff, the lightness of a horse.
Yeah. And then some I think live around, so it's just a walking distance to there.
So now they're running ads.
Sorry?
They're running ads now.
They're running ads. So give me just. Osama? Thank you for staying with us. You're watching Glow Matters tonight. We're looking into the issue of guardianship, foster care placement, and adoption. And now we are on the tail end of this particular segment where we have questions from our audience. And I've been able to receive a couple of questions here, which I'll ask Advocate Nelima. So first we're having Gad Best, who is the legal aid president at Kenyatta University School of Law. And he is asking, are there any stipends given to adopters to facilitate the upkeep of the adoptees?
No, there's none. In fact, the law provides that they will need to ascertain to the court that they have not received funds or a promise to receive funds if they should adopt this child.
Okay.
Yes.
It's quite interesting because somebody will see that maybe because they have taken permanent residence, and it's quite a good initiative, given that the government also has been saying the same, that maybe they might be a stipend. But be it as it may, I think being the parent now, you take the responsibility from that particular point.
Exactly. And why we have that provision is to stop it from being said that somebody bought a child.
Okay.
Yes. Opening that up could be a Pandora's box, child trafficking, whatnot, exchanging a child as a good. Because of financial promise or financial gain.
Because there's a motivation factor at the
outside of the child's best interest.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Now, we're having Douglas here says, are they legal loopholes in terms of adoption in Kenya that might endanger the best interest of the child?
Now, we have so many stakeholders involved. Unless something falls through the cracks, the government has tried to ensure, and even the courts tried to ensure, that in this adoption process, there's nothing that can happen that would endanger a child. And unless something happens that is beyond their control, then they really try to mitigate such harm from going further or from continuing to happen to that child. That child can be removed from the adoptive parent home.
Okay.
Yeah, at any point before the adoption order is made, and even after the adoption order is made and something comes to light that means this child is endangered, that child can still be placed under care and protection away from that home.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, even on that, in scenarios whereby a child is adopted and the process of adoption is complete, is there perhaps a recourse in terms of the child saying that I don't want to be in this particular setup?
For whichever reasons, and because sometimes a child could be going through the rebellious teenage years. So are they legitimate reasons, or are they, I'm not sure you want to call it a tantrum? So I think the court would want to listen to this child and then involve other people, for example, a counselor, for example, the director of children's services, to ascertain what's really happening that's causing this child to behave in this way.
Okay.
Yeah, is there harm happening to them, or are they, you know,
Okay.
yeah.
We're having Timothy ask, what is the government doing to ensure adoption of street children into foster care?
Now, not necessarily into foster care, because the government is trying to come up with institutions where these children can find a home. Now, where there's that spillover, and then we have the charitable organizations that are run by private individuals. They are taken in there. And now for other charitable institutions, that's when foster care comes in.
Okay.
Now, the idea of foster care hasn't been fully embraced by the Kenyan citizens, maybe because it's new. But the more it grows, I think then the intention will be for the government to see how they could maybe even fund it to ensure that then more children are in homes than there are in streets or maybe in a facility.
All right.
Yeah.
We're having Cedric Wandera ask, are there any policy changes or legislative actions that you believe could positively impact the outcomes for these children?
I want to believe we are talking about vulnerable children.
Yeah, in this case, I think those under guardianship, foster care, and adoption.
Yeah. The Children Act 2022 is a very comprehensive legislature, and it tries to ensure, number one, that vulnerable children are placed in any alternative home-based and relative-based care, for example, that guardianship or kinship adoption, fostership, before any other action is taken. Yes.
Right.
Yes. So the act, the intention of the act is to make sure every child, if possible, and that is the best case scenario, that every vulnerable child is placed in a home, and even a better scenario is if it's in a home with a relative.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're having Mary ask, what are some of the long-term considerations that are put in place when it comes to foster care?
There are no long-term considerations with foster care. Yeah. It is meant to be temporary because the intention of it is for this child to have a home while an action is taking place. For example, their relatives are being traced, or this child is now being placed for adoption.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're having Clifford Mwange, first-year student, ask, can the court make an adoption order in respect to children that had previously been adopted?
Yes, yes. If the initial adoption was revoked, the court can make another order for them to be adopted by the new person seeking to adopt that child. Okay. Yes. And reasons for revocation of an adoption order could vary. It depends on the circumstances that have been presented before the court. Because this is such a serious order, for it to be revoked and the ramifications that it would have, the court would want to confirm first that whatever allegations are being made are legitimate before revoking such an order.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Are there any adoption policies that are looked into when it comes to geographical location of where the child is adopted? The reason I'm saying things is because there was a scenario in Uganda where a foreign couple had adopted a child, relocated the child to, was it United States or Canada, I'm not sure. But in that scenario, the child that was adopted was being molested for a period of time, and now the child had to be brought back into the country. In scenarios whereby the government is limited in terms of monitoring the activities of the child, and this issue is permanent, but the child has been taken to a foreign country, how then do international laws kick in, or what now are the mechanism that comes into play?
And that is why we have the moratorium against international adoption.
Okay.
Because we didn't have a mechanism of checking in on children who've been adopted from Kenya and have been removed from the Kenyan jurisdiction. Because once a child is outside the country, the jurisdiction of the Kenyan court ceases to apply. Now, even if we were to hear, or the government is to become aware, unless now they use international law to have that child extradited, we didn't have mechanisms for the government to do, maybe random check-ins, or to have a court on the other side of the world confirming to the government in Kenya that, yeah, this child is still in good condition, or the child is well taken care of. So I believe what the stakeholders are working on is to try and come up with a mechanism, or maybe even a law, because then it would involve so many countries, because they just don't adopt from the US, it's not just from the US, UK, I mean it's worldwide. So that how do we try and mitigate that if a child is adopted and removed from Kenya, they could suffer, effects such as trafficking and whatnot.
Given that the relationship in terms of adoption between a parent and a child is monitored for 3 months, or say 6 months or so, the child could have bonded with the parent in question, but not the siblings that they are going to now form a relationship with as, siblings once it's permanent. What happens when the other siblings, the biological children in that family setup, do not form a good relationship with the new adopted child, because sometimes it can get toxic to the detriment of the child that has been adopted?
So integration and awareness, I think, would try and cure that. Awareness before that adoption process is done to the children of the home, that we are bringing in so and so, and this is your sibling, just making them aware that now once that adoption process has already occurred, then we are at the same standing, we are brother and sister, we are not brother and adopted sister. So that even the words that are being used in the home are positive, adoption positive, to ensure that they do not feel like they're different. And then again, using mechanisms such as counseling, therapy, so that now we have somebody try and help them integrate and accept this person as one of their own.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, in cases whereby children in a adoption home are either siblings, they're either twins, triplets, but the scenario is that maybe a parent who wants to adopt wants only a child, but these children are a pair, they're twins, they have known each other for their whole lifetime. What are some of the balancing situation in terms of such scenarios?
The goal is not to separate siblings and even blood relatives. So ideally they would move together. If they're moving to a foster home, they move together. If they're moving to a guardian home, the ideal situation is for them to move together. And if they're being adopted, the ideal again is for them to be adopted together. And so because placement happens at point of adoption society, then they would be cognizant of the fact that so-and-so are siblings. We don't want to separate them, because separating them does not serve their interest. So ideally, they will now place you with somebody different, perhaps who doesn't have also their sibling. with them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, finally, because of time, although this can be a topic that can go on and on and on about, when you look into the Children Act 2022 and the Constitution, given the digital transformation that we're having as a country, do you think the law has filled all the gaps when it comes to adoption? Do we have blind spots that might expose the children when they go to this sort of parentship setups?
We're still coming up with guidelines. So we've made steps, but we're not yet fully there. With time and continued work behind the scenes with the stakeholders, then we'll continue coming up with policies that will bolster the Children Act, because as I said, it's already very comprehensive. So then it will aid its implementation, so that then we get to the point that the government is envisioning of alternative care working in the country, foster care working, you know, guardianship working, adoption working, whether it's local or international, a mechanism where the government can, you know, monitor or can have random checks with children who've been adopted from Kenya and are in foreign countries. I think it takes time to get there, and steps are being made towards it.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Advocate Nelima, for your time, giving us a perspective on these issues, because sometimes it's new term. We are used to inheriting children, quote unquote, when such scenarios occur where children don't have their parents. But it's good to know what the law says and the mechanisms that are there in terms of taking care of children.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right.
Yeah.
That has been Advocate Nelima, of course, giving us a perspective on the issue of guardianship, foster care placement, adoption. A lot has been said. I couldn't add more, but I hope you have been able to capture a thing or two on what the law says concerning children and parenthood. That's all we had here for Law Matters. Do join us next week on Tuesday for much, much more on issues surrounding law. My name is Irene Mwenge. Have a splendid night.